Cool, awesome. Kia ora katoa toa. Um, my name is Ben Tairea. I am Māori Polynesian from the island of Cook Islands, and currently living in Aotearoa, where I was also born and raised. Um, but try to get back home as often as I can. Um, yeah, I want to acknowledge Adam and Nick for organising this. It was I think when a friend first pointed me to the Natives in Tech website, I was super excited to see this community, the seeding of this community, and really excited to see watch it grow. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of commonalities that we see across the globe coming from Indigenous communities, whether it be the values that we share, um, the future that we want, some of the struggles also that we encountered. So really similar sort of journeys, um, and I think that one of the things that we're kind of really acknowledging is that for Indigenous people, our greatest value was always our ability to collectivize, to work together. Um, and so being able to sort of see this type of community on a global scale work, I think the previous President Ali spoke a bit about how we do that in Aotearoa. We're a small nation here, and they talk about 6 degrees of separation globally in New Zealand. In Aotearoa, we talk about 2 degrees, because we're quite well connected, and everybody's accessible. So being able to sort of reach, and have connections globally, being able to support each other's growth globally is really exciting. Something that we've kind of always thinking about here in Aotearoa. And I think there's such a strong Indigenous nation here, and a lot of work that's been done. And I think we've sort of seen it in other sort of sectors. The health sector. A lot of stuff that happens in politics of Indigenous support. We talk about the future, and the influence that technology has. It's a natural progression that we start to share and move into the space of support and tech. So yeah, thank you to all that are involved in putting this together. That was really like when there was like, oh, we're doing a conference. I'm like, yeah, whatever it is, I want to be there. I want to share what we're working on. I want to learn about what other people are working on. I want to see what we can do to sort of really grow and support each other. I think one of the big things that we see is tech being built by and for people that don't not our communities, not our own. And so we end up with like people using Facebook to share traditional knowledge, or using Salesforce to manage our communities, and all of these like solutions that don't align with our values or with our communities, but our people trying to use them in ways that to achieve the goals that we're looking to achieve. And that was really like the thing that we sort of said, well, if we were really going to make a difference, then it was we were or something, I suppose, a personal motivator was to really stand up and own that space and say, well, as an Indigenous person in tech, I want a tool that works for me and my community, and that aligns with our community. So that was kind of the motivator. So awesome to be a part. I guess I'll jump into my presentation unless there's any other questions before we get started. Or should I just jump in?
Yeah,
Okay.
Go ahead and jump in.
Cool. So you present now. Cool. So just want to confirm you guys can see the screen. Is that coming through?
I think you have to select and then share.
Okay.
So if you go to present now, your entire
Yeah,
screen,
sure.
then you have to click the screen. Yeah, kind of annoying.
How about now?
Yep.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. Like I said, my name's Ben. Kai Whakahaere for Āhau. And Kai Whakahaere is the leader of sorts, which would translate to, the CEO of a company. One of the founders, and I've been working on Āhau's kind of a young project. It's only been going for about a year. but we're really excited about some of the potential that it might provide for our people, for our communities, and also where it's gotten to in just the past year. Um, and so we've got some of like the values that are really important to us, and this is really what drives us. It wasn't really about like the product, um, which is kind of, with any kind of new thing, you start with an idea and then it naturally progresses and grows. And so we are definitely working on a product, but that's not necessarily the driver of what we do, and not what we might end up doing. But anyways, I want to talk a lot about. I'm going to present a little bit about Āhau, what our mission is, and what we are currently working on. So, what we kind of decided now that like our mission really is going to be like Indigenous empowerment through technology. I'm gonna break that statement down a little bit. And so from like a local context, Indigenous is, we're looking at how can we empower our communities, and who are the Indigenous people that we're really looking for. And so locally we're talking about like, I think there's 8,300 Māori land trusts, Māori being the Indigenous people of New Zealand. We have like 160 plus iwi, which is like the different tribal identities or entities across the nation. We have 773 official marae. So these are all kind of like official numbers. So you have to understand that with Indigenous people, there's lots of stuff that's happening that isn't being recorded or captured or submitted into, data records. But this is the stuff that we know that and we can measure and stuff. So there's also 773 marae, which I think would kind of translate to the meeting grounds, or I can't remember the term that you used, Adam. But the marae are, the kind of the focal points for the communities, the gathering places. Any events and stuff are usually run within the marae, and then there's another marae to serve the different areas of our iwis and different tribes. And so we also have, tens of thousands of hapu and whānau. So there's a kind of like what you might refer to as like sub-tribes of some of the larger tribes. And, people identify with their hapu, and, specifically with your whānau is like your family. Understanding that we come from pretty large families, specifically here in like the lower south. My family is, I think my dad's from a family of 13. His father was from a family of 15. Our whānau, in numbers, we reflect somewhere around 300. And I think, that number keeps growing as we kind of build more ties and create that link. And so it starts to, what we're starting to look at is like, how can we empower these people? And then what we also realized is like really quickly in the conversations that we were having, is like Indigenous is global scale. This statement was like Māori empowerment through tech, but the things that we were building, the conversations we were having, were really about like, hey, we would love to do some of the things in our community. Can we work together? I'll talk a little bit about that. But we found, there's 350 million Indigenous people globally. Again, what's recorded. In Aotearoa, we have 800,000. So we are a very small percentage of Indigenous people across this globe. And if we can build something that will create value for our people here, we would love to be able to share that with the rest of the world, and help to create value with others. And hence why I was quite keen to really talk about this and see if other people are interested in this mahi, in this work. So that's kind of like what we're talking about in Indigenous. And then we were like, okay, cool. So we've got our people. What's the things we're going to do? And so I took this term empowerment and just like literally are doing, and help to recognize the use of resources. So I thought, the term empowerment, taking it, just as the term empowerment, I was kind of surprised how much it related to, um, what it is that we were trying to do for Indigenous communities and the use of technology. And then, like the technology side, we started off with just really focusing on software, and we're slowly like transitioning out of that because, what started off with an idea became something a little bit bigger as we started to communicate with our communities. That actually there was a need across the kind of the spectrum of tech. Um, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well and what we're doing. So yeah, the design, development, deployment, and training of software, hardware, and infrastructure. So we had our mission, and then we were okay, cool. So if that's our mission, what are some of the things that we're going to do? What are our objectives going to be? And so we kind of realized that there were like three major commonalities. Probably, could have easily have been four, but three of them kind of came up. I think the fourth one is inherit. It didn't necessarily come out because it's just known. But the three major ones were we have Indigenous people have a collective culture. They have like a collective people community, and they generally have a collective um, asset base or a land that they were connected to, and they were kind of responsible for to look after. Whether they owned that or not was definitely a huge part of their community and their identity. And that people sat in the middle of that. And so we kind of said, well, okay, these are four big things that we're going to do, that we wanted to do, and we are currently working as a young kind of company, social enterprise. We are currently focused on the first pillar, which is like culture and cultural management. And so that led to our first kind of project. Um, so if we were going to do cultural management, we put together this project called Whakapapa Order. The Whakapapa Order is like, the Whakapapa is in essence a genealogy or, a family tree or what it is that connects me to my people, to my community, to my land. In Aotearoa, we see, this is the core of who we are as a people, and hearing that kind of resonate across other Indigenous communities. It really is about the big part of how we're connected and who we are as an identity. Um, and so making sure that we're managing that is actually one of the biggest things that kind of came from like the first thing. This like the foundation of and the early stuff and how Āhau came together was actually like I was myself I was working on a personal project of like how do we I was going through. I think we all kind of go through this stage as individuals of like who am I and where do I come from? And from Indigenous people in an Indigenous context, that you generally goes through, who is my parents, grandfather, great grandfather, and so on and so on, and you start to go back down this line and start to learning your whakapapa is a big part of learning your identity, so learning your heritage and the stories behind that. And what we're seeing, is a huge disconnect between people and their cultural identity within our communities. We have, I think, we have what's the New Zealand census, which is a sham and its ability to be able to like collect information from Indigenous people. But the last one that was done was terrible. The one before that wasn't too bad, and I think what they identified is out of we had somewhere around 700,000 people identify as Māori. 100,000 of those did not identify with one particular tribe. So, not knowing who they were connected to, and we're now seeing a lot more of that within our communities of people now not identifying as Māori because they can't tie back those relationships, and that's we are losing our people literally if we don't maintain our identity. And so that was the really like the core element of anything that we wanted to do going forward. We would need to sort of address this issue. Um, So what was the problem? Important cultural identity information is forgotten or lost because we don't have a tool that can capture, store, and share our information in a way that works for Indigenous people. The solution we kind of started to come up with to address that was the development of individual and community repositories for the preservation and transfer of information and knowledge. So really kind of closely linked to some of the work that Arataki are doing and Lee, and that's why we sort of all catch up and try to support each other as best as we can, but also understanding that there is a lot of space for development in this and supporting our communities to do this work. So this was kind of like where we got to. We put together this project and we got some co-funding from the Ministry of Culture and Heritage, a philanthropic, oh man, I didn't get that word right, Foundation North, who likes large funders, and Āhau, so we co-funded some of it ourselves. And the key things we were going to look at is the preservation and digital format and storage, the transfer with the use of mobile and desktop applications for capture and access, protection with cryptography, and aligning that with cultural protocols, and sovereignty of data using decentralized software and community hardware. So I think this was like the hardest part for us. We felt like if we can start here, we can really help push our people forward moving into the space. I think it was one of the big things that constantly comes up, and it was interesting to hear reflected from Michaela as well, is this question of where is my information being stored? There's the concept of our data being tapu, or being something sacred to our people. And so how, the transition from oral histories to recording them and storing them, our elders and the knowledge holders, almost the first thing they ask is, where does it get held? How is it protected? Um, if we hold a story in our head and we try to share that, it's quite easy for us to decide who we share that with. And it's quite also hard for them to then go along and start to share a story, or to remember every facet of that, and for it to leak into people that might use it for the wrong purposes. And so what we had to do is to try to address that. And how do we kind of solve a solution, or provide a solution that might provide what would see already happen within our communities? And so we started to look at the decentralized software to deliver this. And that was like a real key element for us in moving forward and trying to create something different. We noticed that there was one of the first things we looked at when we were talking to our communities, and that came out, was there's already a system called Makuru, which does like amazing stuff and has already been providing amazing work for people around the globe, for Indigenous communities around the globe. One of the things I think it didn't directly address was the relationship between whakapapa and information. So what's my family line, and what information is relevant to me, and how can I sort of manage that? And also, how can we use like those family connections to transfer information and make that information available for others, for my children and their children, and so on. And also the use of like cryptography and encryption, and decentralized data storage, which we're going to look at. And so what I wanted to show like a little bit of like the internet as we know it, and how we build like digital tools for today. I just put this together yesterday. I knew I needed to work on it, but it may be a little bit off. But what we kind of see is we have one person on the bottom left, and say he wants to share a photo of his daughter with either his sister or his cousin. Those are the three people represented at the bottom. And what he would do is, open up like a Facebook application or something, put Google Storage, Google Drive, and he would use his desktop or his device to upload that, and go through his router, and then go through and then disappear into the cloud. And that's kind of like how our people understand information and the transfer of information as they know it. But what's really not conveyed and not well understood is that it's actually just going to somebody else's computer. And so they'll travel down that line and end up that photo and that information is now sitting on somebody else's server, whether that be Facebook or AWS or Google or wherever. So all of our information and knowledge is currently sitting there, and what we then see is actually a whole bunch of people that we have or that are now sitting in between us and our knowledge or us and our information. You have the owners of those servers of which that information is stored, and they could go under. They could stop to maintain that information. Anything could happen, um, and all of that information would be lost. And we've seen that happen, or heard stories of that happen in our communities a number of times. So that was kind of one thing that our communities really pulled up on. It's like, if we use your system to store our information, what guarantee can you provide? And I think it guarantees, especially when you're talking about a startup, that was something that we were never really confident in. And also, if we were to talk about empowerment, there's a huge amount of dependency here. You're dependent on Google to store that, dependent on them to provide it for free. We at any day, Facebook or Google could decide that their business model was now going to be information. We know, I think, with Facebook and Google, you are the product, not necessarily the customer. And so at any stage, they could decide that the information is now a product and charge you to get access to your own information. And so how does that serve our communities that don't have access to funds? So I think, yeah, there's just sort of wanting to show on this diagram. And then you have your ISP providers that are sitting in the middle. You also need to have a connection to the internet to have access to that information. You have to pay them their fees. They charge you per photo, per information. So this what we saw as this cultural right to do knowledge transfer now becomes almost a thing of privilege. Do you have the money to access the internet? Do you have the connections? Are you in the right places to do that? And how are we? If we were going to build something that would work on a global level, then there's huge amounts of Indigenous people that don't have access to internet. So how could we address some of that? There's huge infrastructure problems in place there. And so this is sort of what we saw around like this dependent design. Our people were absolutely the consumers of technology, and not being involved in much of the process at all. So we kind of decided we were really interested, and did quite a bit of a tech scope around what it was and what we could use, and some of the key technologies that we've landed on. We came from really investigating blockchain, and that was going to be the source of what we use. And we kind of found that there's a lot of maturity that needs to happen within blockchain, but there are other technologies that are kind of using these append-only logs, or blockchains to achieve a similar thing. And so the two kind of protocols that we've really landed on is one technology called scuttlebutt, which is a distributed social network. And if anybody's not on there, then I would recommend it. It's an amazing place to be as far as social networks and social media goes. And also the DAT Foundation, which have come up with like a file sharing protocol, distributed file sharing protocol. And so those were what we kind of recognized, and what we really saw. How do we answer that question of where does this information go? And we can say, well, actually, it goes on your device, and we can use some of these communication protocols to share it from device to device, without having anybody in sitting in that. One thing we really liked specifically about Scuttlebutt was actually you didn't even need the internet to use it. You can share from device to device using the hardware that you own within your device. Your ability to create a hotspot. If you have a Wi-Fi router, you can connect a whole bunch of people, or even within your hotspot. And so we're doing peer-to-peer. We're using this DAT and Scuttlebutt peer-to-peer protocols to answer this question of data sovereignty and ownership over that information. So yeah, that was we've moved from like the internet as we know it to the internet as we want it, and really about like um, being able to build technologies that matched and aligned the values of our communities. Um, the next thing we were sort of like was a community design. So what we realized is that when you've got a distributed platform or distributed technologies, peer-to-peer technologies, it becomes community design. And so this would mean that we've gone and spoken to our marae, our meeting places, our tribal groups, family groups, all of these different communities can manage their own cloud infrastructure, their own all within the software of their own device. And it's scalable based on the number of people that you have within your network. So really leveraging our asset of working together as a collective. I think again reflecting on the end of Michaela's talk was like we feel that we have found a technology that aligns with the way our communities work, the way that it aligns with our cultural values. And so this is something that we're currently developing at the moment. And again, empowerment not being that it doesn't just work on a software level. It actually means that getting people to understand. We have like these little marae kits with this just like a Raspberry Pi. That's like our server, and we just plug in a hard drive, and that's our database, and giving people an understanding of now you own the hardware that's serving up all of this information. And so when people ask where does your information go, you can literally point to it. You can hold it in your hand and say, here is our information. And that being a bit of a shift from it's up. People pointing up at the sky and saying it's in the cloud. Like, okay, yeah, that's wanting our people to really understand and move into the space and take ownership over their information. That was also another big part of it, is if we were to look at preservation, how do you do knowledge management for the next 1,000 years? We could never, I think as Indigenous people, we thinking like, there's a saying, we think 5 generations back and 5 generations ahead. We always look into our past by thinking about the future. And there's no way that we could decide, that actually this piece of hardware is going to last for 1,000 years. We know that it won't. This piece of technology won't. But what we do know is that the people will last for 1,000 years. And so if we give them ownership over and management over that information, then being able to hold it, then being able to know exactly how the system works, then they can then decide where it goes next, how it transitions, how it moves on to the next thing, the next place. Maybe they build their own app and they decide to store it there. We know our ability to maintain our relationships will grow our community, exponentially. If we are able to capture everyone, I think had a look on just our family record. I think our number with every generation it tripled almost. So, if we're talking a few generations down the time, a family of like 300. Next generation, it's going to be like 900. The generation after that, we're going to be like a few thousand. So, and this information is all going to be relevant to them as part of their identity, who they come from, and who they are. So yeah, this is kind of like the basics of what it is that we're trying to develop and we're building. Again, going back to like the what is the how is almost as important, if not more important, than the what. And so really making sure that it was community led. We have kind of 4 developers contributing to this at the moment, 3 of which are Indigenous, and 1 that came from the scuttlebutt community. So it's still a really strong values alignment. And we do have other open source contributors. So one of the things that was really cool, I came over to, I was in San Fran earlier this year for the D-Web conference, and connected with some amazing people there, the Decentralized Web conference that was, and have now been have contributors and contributing to really similar the use of peer-to-peer protocols within a project in Namibia, and then we're aligning even closely with the project in Brazil in the Amazon, with their communities. And we have, being part of, Scuttlebutt, which is open source tech, that community, we have people that are working on like group encryption, um, people working on community hardware. One of the real awesome things it's about, I think a cool thing here is finding the right community. And we really feel like we've got that. We're from within Scuttlebutt, that community are just amazing people wanting to do amazing things. Um, we've also got it's our design is very much community led. It was one of the first things we said is that we weren't actually going to determine how the thing will work and what it will do. We will constantly work with our people and get feedback from our people to drive it forward and to really lead us and tell us what it is that they needed. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just building something that we thought was really cool, but actually something that was going to be really useful. So we've got I've got a couple of tribal groups here represented here of who we're working with. Um, and we do monthly design sessions. We talk regularly on the phone. We meet with them one to one. But yeah, every month we kind of get together and look at the next stage of development. We do lots of speaking sessions within their own community. I think there is a learning curve that we need to progress through within those communities around um, really empowering people within this tech and bringing them along on this journey. We really don't want people pointing up at the sky anymore and thinking about the cloud as that. We really want people to be able to say what it is and own what it is and know how it works and have built that understanding. And that's what we think will be, create some of the greatest impact. So we're quite strong in our community work. Um, and yeah, the other stuff is also, staying really well connected within the industry. There we have universities tackling some of the major issues, and a lot of work that's being done there. We have Te Mana Raronga, which is an established multi-data sovereignty network, um, who are really pushing forward some of the policies and principle stuff around data management, and also, looking for what funding we can do. We're an open source project. The more we can get funding for it, the longer it will stay like that. So we are really driven to try to get funding over investment before we move into that. So yeah, that's what we're doing. I won't spend too much time. I won't read through all of this. There's a lot of text on this. But I will kind of read our impact statements of what we see from our cultural management is that communities and individuals have enduring cultural identity and practices. This is a strong part of what we're doing and the core of it. I haven't mentioned like Āhau and Te Reo Māori is me, or I am. We say ko ben Āhau, I am Ben. And so really it was really about looking at this from an individual perspective, but being able to connect them into that community. And so enjoying that identity of who I am, if I can make those relationships and those connections now, if I have access to that content, that is a thing that can be there for future generations to come. We also expect to see that there will be growth in cultural heritage industry, creating new opportunities for employment and revenue. We think that especially from New Zealand, or out there, all we have is, I don't know whether it's unique to us or not. I don't think it's specifically unique to us, but perhaps something that we do really well is, I think it's called cultural tourism. And so one of the, New Zealand has huge, I think our largest income income from a national perspective is tourism. And so a big part of that is people wanting to understand and learn about the cultural heritage and the cultural narratives of the cultural people, the indigenous people here. And I think so. We've been getting quite good at kind of doing stuff for other people. I think what we will start to see is growth in the industry about cultural heritage for ourselves, for our own, maintaining our own identity. And we're already starting to see some people transition into that, whether it be media technologies and the capture of information, excited about seeing some growth in that area. More Māori are employed in media production and archiving networks. We think we can lay down some of this. One of the things is, again, like the how is really where we're going to get the impact of really enabling growth within our communities, getting a better understanding, getting people excited about cultural archiving, capture of information, how to understanding networks and how that works, or inherently within the system. If you want to use the system, you have to understand, oh cool, I need to get a router. Oh, if I want to connect that router to the internet, oh cool, maybe we need to get an antenna so that we can get it over the hill. And that being like some of the core work, even when we're talking about like we look at hardware and infrastructure, that's the sort of stuff that we're talking about. So yeah, the other thing we're also really interested as communities have distributed cloud storage capability. So being able to store information not only for their own communities, but depending on like distributed storage stuff, which isn't something particularly new, depending on how you reference new, but we've seen this with other distributed file storage systems. We think that the values when communities or others are looking for a place to store their knowledge, if I have the option, maybe as a non-Indigenous person, to say, do I want to store my information on the Google Cloud or on my local Indigenous cloud, and support those people or support that community, and understand the values. Google's definitely making money off me somehow. Whereas we know from the Indigenous perspective, we see data as being sacred. So the likelihood of us, creating algorithms off the information or on selling information is just never happened. So yeah, one of the other impacts that's kind of come through from that. It also means there's an opportunity there for other applications to be built upon this. So yeah, that's quite cool. Where are we currently at with our project? So we only really got started with this particular project in July, and product development's going really well. We've managed to integrate sort of scuttlebutt cat to the front end framework of Āhau, building out and sort of creating new things of like how do we look at or how do we define what a profile is. How do we define what a person is? We have different definitions for that from the Indigenous perspective. So there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff that's being developed. We will have like our first sort of beta testing within our own closed tribal network, tribal partners, and doing some initial archiving and information transfer. We want to have like this free open source product ready to the market, or for people in February, and we're looking into like a launch event around the calendar, around the Māori calendar, so we have like some big events coming up in February, and we will officially finish our project, or we're only really resourced through June, so really having like something really solid and useful then, but also we are kind of out in the communities, or talking to government, talking to funders, trying to get further project funding to continue to build it out and start to look at the future of what Āhau will do and maintaining that. So we've kind of like within that project we've addressed some of like the cultural identity, cultural management, identity management. We are very much looking at what community management might look like for our people. There's a whole bunch of like really core things that we see coming up. Tribal registries being like kind of the number one thing that our people need to do, especially when it comes to like information gathering, because who is in your community is the core element of having a community, being able to define that, being able to name the people that are a part of that. So that's kind of the big thing: decision making, communications, community insights. Those are kind of like some of the things that we're going to be pushing into next, and we're drafting up projects for that. So who's involved? So far we are a pretty small team. Like we are officially or technically a social enterprise or a registered company. We've got some amazing all Indigenous directors on that board. The employees, we've only got really 5 people working on this and being funded to do this. So you got myself and the co-founder, Kamari Dunn. We've got Mix, who is our non-Indigenous guy, but the dude that came from Scuttlebutt, who we love and appreciate. And we've got Luandro and Shreese also contributing. And we've got some amazing advisors as well. Um, that's all that I have to talk about. I haven't checked the time at all. Oh yeah, so I did all right. But yeah, I wanted to provide some opportunity for questions to be asked. That was really, or really, well, why I wanted to do this presentation was just to have a discussion and to talk to people about um, not not necessarily what we're working on, but what others are working on and some of the challenges that are faced. But we are open to contributors and collaborators. Very welcome, don't mind. We're an open source project. We meet on Mondays. The stacks, scuttlebutt backend with the Vue front end and GraphQL in the middle. We're also looking for more funding opportunities at the moment. And I think that this was actually something that kind of came out from us doing a bit of research on this, is that there are a bunch of shared funding opportunities on a global scale. I mean, nationally, there's some which will be more relevant for us in Aotearoa, but globally there are quite a few as well. And so, if you have opportunities that you think we might be interested in, I definitely know of a couple. The Dubai Innovation Summit are offering like €100 for any kind of social innovation. There's like an open tech fund, which is doing like small community grants globally. Yeah, be more than happy to share some of that. I think funding is always kind of an issue when we're building things. And we're also really interested in understanding if, how this might work for your community. We're doing some interesting discovery stuff with the Amazon project, and it was really interesting contributing to the Namibia project for a community that was illiterate. So couldn't read or write, a hugely oral tradition, and so trying to build tech for that scenario was super interesting, really really cool, amazing learning. No internet connectivity there, so um, yeah, that's been a really awesome project. Um, yeah, please, if you want to learn more, if you want to get in contact with me, love to talk more um, and connect with you also. That's me. I'm open to any questions.
Cool. This is something that I've really been interested in. Haven't been able to uh, get into that space yet, but I was curious from a technical perspective. There's like a few different solutions out there. You talked about a few of them, which were like DAT and Scuttlebutt, which I'm familiar with. I've also looked at IPFS. What kind of guided you in the direction of Scuttlebutt? Is it like the protocol? Was it the people? Because I know Andre Staltz is really big in the open source community. So yeah, just curious about the decision making.
Yeah, so we kind of like, it was initially it was the protocol. We had to find a tick that kind of ticked the boxes, and you're right, there were a few, and then it was 100% the people. Um, we met with some of the community. We actually so Mix, who is now our senior developer, approached us when we were still conceptualizing this and just said like um, shared the values of what it was that we were expressing that we were trying to do. And he just said like, however I can contribute, I want to. Um, he was willing to self-fund himself to contribute. Um, so there was a real passion there. And so, and then we met with the community and got talking to them. I joined Scuttlebutt and just saw what, like, some of the stuff that was happening, some of the work that they were doing. um, yeah, it was so very much. And then again with like the DAT Foundation and file sharing, there was again it was like tick the boxes from the technological perspective, but it was the values that were coming from the community that was really about something that we could pin something to. Um, so yeah, that was it.
Cool. And have you seen like because we're kind of talking about basically like building our own infrastructure using the hardware that we already have instead of relying on a third party service. Have you seen like some of those pockets start to spring up in your community as far as building that decentralized infrastructure?
We have, yep, absolutely. So, I mean, for us, it's always been. I think the question has always been around. Well, when it comes to like self-serving, um, infrastructure, it's always been a question around funding. I think people have sort of always assumed that you had to buy, large data servers. You had to have like set up big data server rooms and so on. And that for so often has been the case, specifically in a centralized sort of system. But if we're talking about like, how can a family do it? How can a community that operates, with no funding, how can they spin that up? It really, just offering a decentralized system for that, kind of really seemed to match. Um, so yeah, there's definitely been a call from that within the community, and yeah, we're looking forward to sort of really addressing that out and seeing how supporting the scaling of that. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's still like in the process of happening and getting wrapping people's mind around it first, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. I
it,
think yeah, there's just a huge amount of learning, especially for a community of people that are hugely untechnical, and so that's been one of our pains and pleasures is how do we express what it is that we're trying to do, but also really enjoying the sharing of what we know and the bringing people along and teaching that has been really rewarding process also.
so I always have questions on these things because I'm always curious about them, but
Cool,
um,
bro.
there's I I kind of think this extends also over to self-sovereign identity. Um, have you looked into that? I mean, that's another extension of this, and also it's another thing that you want to teach people about and say, hey, you don't need your government to identify you. And actually, we like within my tribe, we face an issue where what we have a centralized government, whereas traditionally we had tribal towns, and the tribal towns were sovereign entities. And so having something like self-sovereign identity would allow people to actually begin to identify with what they actually identify with, which is actually their tribal towns and not the centralized government. So I don't know, just some thoughts there.
Yeah, no, cool, bro. I'm really glad that you actually brought that up. And as I was presenting, I was thinking, like, why don't I have a slide on this? Because it is something that we have been doing quite a bit of work in, and something that when we specifically, we probably will use a blockchain solution for that. I know that there's still a lot of work being done, but we are kind of contributing to that identity, self-sovereign identity space within, the Web3 consortium. Um, so yeah, that's definitely one of the core things, especially if I can hold my information, then I can start to assert things. So that whole relationship between the issuer, verifier, and the holder is 100% um, being developed within the system. It's not something that we're starting off straight off the bat because that isn't something that needs to be done. But we do go through this identity verification process whenever we try to connect with our communities, like just being validated as, yeah, I recognize you, Ben. You are son of, Waipuna, you're, grandson of Odu. That process of being verified is my community actually going through whatever similar process of, showing my birth certificate. And so, yeah, we're quite active within the self-sovereign identity community, specifically within New Zealand as well. The whole New Zealand being a digital nation is set up these different organisations to look at the different aspects of tech, and digital identity is one that's started. Um, I think kind of mid last year, and we've been sort of in those discussions since. And so, we're talking about like how can a marae become a verified. I don't know if the terms translate, but KYC and AML verifier, know your customer and anti-money laundering verifier, because we go through a legitimate process around identity. So, um, it's self attestation, self declaration of identity, and then community verification of identity, and then even community identity. I think, yeah, they're all really, really interesting things that we are looking forward, and exploring in depth. Um, so yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Cool. Um, there's no questions in the chat, but if you have like any closing statement before we have Victor come on as the final speaker for the day.
No, yeah, not really. I think I'm just, yeah, really grateful. Thank you for having me to present, and for sharing. I'm grateful to be able to share some of the work that we're doing. Um, and again, yeah, thanks for putting this group together. I'm definitely hoping that we get a chance to meet face to face. It's an important part of our community and how we do things. And so, an in-person conference, I'd love to do that and attend that wherever that may be. New Zealand's a great place. But yeah, wherever it is, please let me know. Keep me informed. Looking forward to meeting you and some of you all in person. Um, and yeah, feel free to get in contact. Um, that's me.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, we are working currently on having an on-site conference next year. It'll be for one day, but yeah, it's in the works now. And if you know anyone that can help with organizing, please send them our way.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be great, man. Like, if there's stuff that you need done, I'm happy to kind of contribute to that from my side. Yeah, and use some of our resources to support that too.
Awesome, awesome.
Cool.
Well, I'm
Thanks,
going
Adam.
to stop